I would say there's been a degree of support expressed, political objections notwithstanding. What will have to happen, though, in terms of the Israeli context, is that there will be a need to overcome a lot of skepticism about the degree to which there's a possibility of a negotiated and ultimately enforceable ceasefire. There's a history of previous deals like this before. We've seen UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which, seems to have broken down. And, clearly there's an element in the Israeli discourse which says if we're going to return to those same parameters, we have to be sure that this time they actually guarantee the quiet that in the past has been evasive, has not been here.
And amid this talk, there is also suggestions a ground offensive by Israel into Lebanon is imminent. What would drive Israel to go down this route?
Well, I mean, ultimately, there's a general sense in Israel that the current situation is untenable. There's this sort of ping pong raining missiles down on Israeli cities. There are tens of thousands, if not up to 100,000 Israelis displaced from their communities on the northern border for close to a year in some cases. And, there's a strong impulse here to be able to sort of restore that to its previous situation. And, as Israeli leaders have said, there's no actual beef with Lebanon per se, but this standoff with Hezbollah is stuck in a stalemate right now. And there's clearly an underlying point within Israel right now to alter that calculus and bring it back to somewhere that's a more feasible situation than it's been up till now.
So how would a ground offensive change the whole picture of what's happening right now across the Israel-Lebanon border?
Well, I mean, obviously, like anything else in sort of such situation, it depends what we see. I mean, there's been an emergency call-up of a couple of extra brigades. So clearly the leadership is signaling a readiness to go down that path if a deal, continues to be elusive and we don't get there. I think the hope is that, again, that displaced residents will go home, that there'll be calm on both sides of the border, that lost deterrence in Israel, shall we say, since last year will be restored to some extent. And I think there's an underlying, need in the Israeli context, again, to sort of break out from this paradigm of a multi-front war with which it's faced right now. Even in, as it relates to the Gaza context, there's been, there's certainly a hope that could maybe radiate positively down there, and maybe we'd see other areas sort of calm down as well if that would happen.
And as you've mentioned, Israel wants its people who have been displaced in the north due to attacks from Hezbollah to be able to return home. What is the situation there right now? Can you bring us up to date?
Well, again, we're seeing volleys go in both directions right now. Both sides are escalating to some extent. The conventional wisdom is that neither one of them wants to sort of reach a situation of a full-scale war to the extent that it's, much higher casualty rates than we've seen to date. But it's very calm. I'm sorry, very calm. It's very uncalm. Totally tense right now, and everybody is watching to see if these ceasefire negotiations produce any sort of progress, or whether, as you asked earlier, we're going to move to a stage of a ground offensive, which would be considerably more murky than what we've seen so far.
Everyone's also watching Benjamin Netanyahu. How do you think he'll likely be received when he addresses the UN General Assembly on Friday?
Well, certainly the region has taken up a lot of bandwidth at the United Nations this week, as in other capitals. I think in terms of what we can expect to hear him say, I think he'll double down on Israel's determination, again, to alter that calculus and break out from the circle of countries that are threatening it. And I think ultimately, even though he will certainly just, tip his hat towards the idea of a diplomatic solution that everybody would like to see ultimately, I think that, he will underscore the fact that if that remains elusive and we don't reach that, then Israel will try and achieve the quiet through whatever other means it has at its disposal right now.
And does he have the support of Israeli citizens back home? What's your sense of it all?
There's been a sort of boost in support for him as a result of the recent events in Lebanon right now, as opposed to maybe over the past year where people were, much more reserved or tentative about any support, if not, against him, shall we say, over how Gaza has played out right now. But I think everything right now is sort of on ice to the extent that people very much recognize what we've seen right now is just sort of a snapshot over the maybe first week or first couple of weeks of what could be a campaign right now. But again, a full-scale campaign would look very different. And conceivably that would have an impact on public opinion, depending on, what lies in front of us and how people receive that.
And many in Israel are still campaigning for hostages to be returned home from Gaza. But we haven't heard much about what's happening in Gaza at the moment with all the focus on Lebanon.
Right. I mean, it seems, as you say, the focus has shifted. Clearly the families and Israel at large is very much distressed that whole front seems stalemated right now. Nobody's looking one direction or the other. The negotiations seem to have broken down. All we can do is hope, for the release of those 100 plus unfortunate people that are still stuck right down there. And we'll, hope that moves somewhere forward as well. Again, the government has said that their hope is that the escalation in Lebanon will ultimately lead to a regional de-escalation that would involve their return as part of these negotiations we're seeing for a ceasefire. So, maybe there'll be some hope out of that.
Shalom Lipner, really good to talk. Thanks so much for joining us on The World Tonight.
Pleasure to be with you.